Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa along with Adam Schrader. We greatly appreciate all of you, homeboys, homegirls, home trends, and the other work from homers out across the world. Adam, we've come a long way from 18 listeners to I think you've seen the latest numbers. It's like, whoa.
Well, there's a lot of people working from home.
Yeah, and I guess they need help from it, and they've turned to us for advice and guidance. So today we're going to get even more advice and guidance from Nicholas Wyman. He's the CEO of the Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation, otherwise known as IWSI, and he's the author of Job U: How to Find Wealth and Success by Developing the Skills Companies Actually Need. That subtitle is so relevant right now, especially the part developing skills companies actually need. So we're going to talk about that book, and then we're also going to talk about how our work from homers, especially the ones who are trying to figure out, the ones who are at a crossroads of what's next. Do I switch careers? Do I start my own business? The Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation helps people figure that out. So, Nick Wyman, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Well, let's first talk about the Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation. What is it? How long has it been around? And how do you guys help, I guess, members or regular people navigate the new world of work?
Sure. So the organization has roots that go back over 3 decades, and it's a coming together of some 501c3 community-based enterprises that are really focused on matching people to the ever-changing world of work, and really at the core of this is very much about partnerships. We're talking to companies and saying, well, you need to pivot in this rapidly changing world, and one of the best ways to do that is to actually form partnerships. But while a lot of people are saying, look at all the challenges that we have at the moment, our message is very clear to companies and to government that ahead of us lies some opportunity. So I think it's how people respond and how people react to this changing landscape.
So what would you say have been the best kind of responses? What the companies that have done the best so far during this shift? Is there kind of a common trait in what they've done to succeed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maintaining their commitment to workforce development. When the economy slows down or turns down, and what we saw with the recession, going back a decade, is that companies' first reaction is to start letting people go, and often it's youngest people who are hardest hit. So the entry-level workers or people who've only been in the workforce a couple of years, they get let go. But what happens to companies, and what we saw then, and I'm sure we'll see now, is that when the economy turns back around, they're going to get caught short. So it's this long-term commitment to skills. Now, that those skills needs are changing, but I think it's how companies are responding to that challenge.
Nick, how long have you been with the company or with the organization?
A long time.
Yeah.
I started my life as an apprentice, actually, and so I had some years working in a multinational company in a human resource capacity. I ran my own businesses. My background, I said I did an apprenticeship, but I did that in culinary arts. So I worked and studied in Europe. But all of that came together about 15 years ago when I realised that I could combine my interest and business experience with connecting companies with the skills that companies actually need.
Well, I asked that question because you can probably give some good, accurate commentary about the differences between 2008, 2009, the skills that you identified as necessary for those unemployed to pick up to improve their chances of finding a job versus the current situation that we're in 2020 and the skills required now. Can you kind of compare and contrast the two most recent recessions?
Yeah, so I think that things now could very rapidly turn around. There is some economic and some political undertones running through our society, which are making businesses and people apprehensive. But of course, we've got the question: will there be a COVID vaccination? What's going to happen as we head back into the North American winter? And I'm hearing, everyone's got an opinion, and I'm sure you both would hear people saying, well, it could go this way or it could go that way. But I think that, what individuals can do, and looking back between then and now, is that there's really interesting ways that you can come into the world of work. And when I wrote these books, Job U, and a lot of other articles and material, I was talking about this labour market mismatch, and that certainly has improved to a certain degree. What we now face is that a lot of people are being laid off or working reduced hours, and they're looking for more work. But we've also got this in parallel. We've got this constant current of globalization and technological change just sitting below the surface, which was changing the way and is changing the way that we work. So if I look at an industry like automotive, for instance, the needs are still there. I mean, the electrification of vehicles is growing by the day. That's a different skill set. So I think the message in 2000, the message a few years ago, and my message now is still the same. People need to keep current. They need to refresh and reboot and constantly take on new skills. But if there was a sort of a one big difference, is I think this idea of the need for everybody, whether they're in work, out of work, looking for work, studying, is this idea that you really need to be flexible and have the ability to adapt. There are sweeping generalizations that remote work is going to be the new normal. I don't entirely agree with that. I think that remote work doesn't work for everyone, and remote work certainly isn't going to work as we see hospitality and tourism and sectors like that bounce back. But I think without a crystal ball, I don't think we know what the new normal is going to look like. But what I can say for sure is that employers are going to be looking for people who are flexible and have the trace of being able to adapt to change.
When you mentioned talking about being able to adapt to change and kind of continuing to build up your skills, you wrote an article in Forbes recently where you talked about kind of the return on investment of college these days versus the return back in the day whenever it was considered kind of absolutely necessary. Can you talk about kind of what the return on investment is for college right now?
Right. I actually believe it's probably less than it has been. I think some colleges have responded and quickly adapted and changed their models, whereas others are sticking to the same fee structure, but the students aren't getting the same return. They're not getting the experience. I know of a young person who finished high school and went off to college. Her parents drove her right across the other side of the country. She checked into the dorms, into the accommodation, and the night before the classes were about to start, got an email to say, unfortunately, we've changed our position, and all classes are going to go back online. A lot of disappointment, and I don't believe that she's going to get the same experience. And what I'm saying to people is that there are options. We were, in popular culture, if you're watching something on television, or quite often you're listening to things, and you have this preset pathway that's drummed into young people, that leaving high school and going straight into 4-year college is the mainstream, and anything else is seen as a side road. And I'm saying to people that there are different ways that you can get to your career pathway. So if you were looking at going to college and undertaking engineering, for instance, maybe you'd be better off, and I wouldn't even call it a gap year. I'd actually suggest that it's more than a gap year. This is an opportunity. You've been in a classroom for 8, 9, 10 years or more. Get out into the world and see if you can get some practical hands-on work experience in the industry which you want to work in. That could be done more informally through an internship, or some volunteering work is a way to get your foot in the door. But the idea of apprenticeship is growing in America. Used to be just building construction, but it's now a lot of occupations, a lot of industries. And this is where you have a structured on-the-job and off-the-job training. You earn while you learn. You could do that in a discipline such as automotive, and that would, you could then, it's the right education at the right time. So once you finish that apprenticeship, if you had the desire to learn, you could then possibly go to university and gain some additional education at that time. But it's very much about the right education at the right time is the message for me.
In the same article, you talked about learning pods, and this is kind of a phrase that's come around, especially because of, school. People with kids know that they have the whole learning pods, but you talk about kind of how businesses might be missing out by not using something along those same lines. Can you talk about how businesses can effectively use the idea of a learning pod?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think that, I went very hard and said at the start of our conversation that individuals need to adapt. So do companies. And I think that companies need to sit back and say, how are we bringing people into our company? How are we training people? And what's the best way to keep groups of people and individuals working together as teams? And I actually think it's more effort is required over video and particularly remotely. So I think if companies go back to the drawing board and say, well, this is what we know works for our company, this is what we've seen works with others. But ultimately, I always say to organisations, they really need to think about a hybrid. So look around at what others are doing, but just because it works in one company doesn't mean it's going to work in your company. Your company may have a different culture. So the learning style is very much going to be a company by company decision. But I think, educating yourself, seeing what's out there, there's a lot of information on the internet. Sadly, not all of it's reliable. So you need to do your homework and do your research, see what works. But what I have found is that companies are very, some companies are very open to sharing their ideas about what works in their organisations. But I'm all for changing the way that people learn. The way that we live is definitely changing, and our society is definitely changing. And I think that the way that people learn in companies and the way that people learn and make that school to work transition is also changing. So change is around us.
Can you talk really quickly about what are learning pods?
It means different things to different people. It's interesting, since I wrote that article, I get a lot of feedback, and I'm not sure if quite often people send me messages on Twitter, and they have a different, a different sense of what a learning pod actually is. But I think that, as I said, companies, their skills needs are changing, and you've got this undertone of technological change, which mean the technical skills that people need to learn are constantly changing. But, to me, I like the idea of a learning pod being very much, as it sounds, a group of people with a common cause, collectively coming together. But I really like the idea of unpacking traditional learning within an organisation and saying what works, what doesn't work, reframe, reboost, and come back together, with a collective cause. And, the idea of a learning pod, it certainly doesn't need to just be workplace focused as well. People come together in pods or groups, with common cause, and have done, for many, many, many years.
When it comes to apprenticeships, what were some of the areas before COVID that were being kind of in demand? And then what do you think are some of the areas that apprenticeships are going to kind of boom after COVID?
Some of the areas that building and construction is one of those areas that particularly we're now talking about skills-based occupations. Building, construction, hospitality, tourism, travel, airline industry, the cruise industry. Some of these industries are going to take many years to bounce back. Areas that have been constantly in demand and will remain in demand, particularly, are things like healthcare, and I think that's in part, of course, to do with the demographics and an ageing population, but it's also to do with the impact of technology on those industries. So there's a lot of new and emerging occupations and work in and around healthcare. Manufacturing had definitely had a dip, but I think advanced manufacturing has a very bright future as the global sentiment, I think, particularly in North America, is that people are interested in consuming less and wanting to consume products that are made locally by local people. So I think there's an opportunity to do more in the advanced manufacturing stake. So I think advanced manufacturing has a very bright future.
We have Nicholas Wyman, CEO of the Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation, author of Job U, on our show. Nicholas, for those at home trying to find their next job or their next gig, what tips do you and your organization have for finding the job? Not necessarily getting the skills, which we've talked about, but actually going about networking or applying to the right places or identifying where the openings are. What tips do you have?
Yeah, well, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there with the word networking. My first piece of advice to people listening would be keep close to your networks and let people know your situation. There's no shame in letting people know that you've been impacted by COVID-19 or the shutdowns and that you're available for work. Communication is always key, and make and refresh connections with companies. So networking doesn't just mean connecting with a few people on a social media platform. It actually means get out and find ways to talk to people and interact. I think that you need to be online interview ready, and we talked at the top of the program about how companies and individuals are adapting to life on video. But so I think people need to expect not only to do their job search online, but interviews as well. Very practical things, and talking to people about figuring out the best camera position and the lighting. Maybe have some practice chats with friends, and check out and troubleshoot any connectivity and sound issues, and be prepared to make that first impression remotely straight off the bat. We could probably go on and on here, but other things, being persistent is really important. It's getting competitive out there, and a lot of HR teams are overwhelmed. So don't wait for them to call you back. I know that's not always possible with a lot of people, but engaging locally. Many firms are suspending their centralised hiring practices. So that could create an opportunity where local work sites are hiring people directly. So I think being available to present and make it easy for time-pressured managers to make an instinctive hiring decision. I've heard some things about artificial intelligence interviews, and a person I was with yesterday was talking about that experience. I really think that companies that are only deploying that sort of technology are going to miss out on some talent. But I do diverge there. But I think if you have an opportunity to look at someone and present yourself to them, I think that's something that people should always look out for.
Yeah, and based on what you just said, to all our listeners, listen to our show. Almost everything that Nicholas talked about, from getting your lighting set on your computer or behind you on a video chat, and fixing your microphone and presenting yourself in front of a camera, and the job skills and the networking, we've covered all of that. Was basically his answer was like a big promotion for our show. We've done close to 150 episodes now, and we go over all this material. So definitely recommend that people continue to listen to us, because we're gonna continue to help you and find ways to improve your situation.
Great advice. Really is good advice. I think the thing that really ties all this together. He's no longer alive, but my father. I was the long-suffering son of a psychologist. So mental health was a big thing for my father. And I'd actually like to, we use the word mental health. I'd actually more like to sort of talk about just well-being. People need to take time to settle and reflect and have, 20 minutes a day where they are able to reflect and be in the right headspace for this rapidly changing world. I mean, we've got to accept the situation that all of us are in. We're all in the same situation, and the economy is going through these huge shifts, and that this change is the order of the day. And this idea of acceptance goes a long way towards this overall position of well-being. That is going to come through when you're talking to people about new opportunities and really opening your mind to the possibilities. I think, if I'd have to say, the thing that I'd really focus in on, that's it. It's this idea of well-being and being in the right headspace to take on new opportunity.
When it comes to businesses kind of looking for new people right now, how have you seen businesses effectively kind of train people that people that are being brought on, new employees? How have you been seeing the most effective companies kind of bring them on if they need to do a semi-apprenticeship, but they're having to do it virtually?
Yeah, so I think a lot of companies, there was the initial shock and the reaction to how are we going how are we going to adapt to this change, and how long is it going to last for? I'm not sure that if we looked back to, I remember the last time I flew in an aeroplane was back in, I think it was, I came back from Kentucky. It was in sort of end of Feb, early March or something like that.
So it seems like about 10 years ago?
It does. And I don't think that back then that we were all prepared that we'd be sitting here way down here in the later parts of the year. So, I talked before about, this idea of adapting. I think the way that the companies initially reacted and the way that they need to react now is something different. So there are so many things that have changed within organisations, and this idea about how companies are actually training people. I feel this underlying sense of having to work harder remotely, both for individuals and companies, to keep that engagement. And there's one word in there that, particularly if I look to my children, it's the word focus. It's trying to keep them focused. It's possible when you are in a group learning environment, and there's a lot of people on a call, that something happens and you lose that focus. So I think if you can, work out a way, I think it should be not like the war of attrition either. I'm much for very focused, shorter interactions in learning. It's just, if you ran a day's workshop, I don't think you can now say, well, let's now deliver that online and it's going to work successfully, because there was so much that went on when you broke for morning or afternoon tea, or the lunch session where people interacted. And so it really requires a redesign of everything you've done in the past, and say, how can we keep this human interaction at the forefront of everything we do? That's the challenge for the world in online learning. And I should say that as you all know, online learning is not something new. I mean, there was a few years back, there was that whole MOOC, MOOC, the massive online learning education, and every other week there's a new app or some new technology coming out. And there's different ways to learn and different ways for people to interact. But at its essence and at its core is this idea of humanity. We need to keep interacting with each other, and we need to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, speaking of MOOC, we just interviewed Jeffrey Selingo and published his episode, who wrote the book MOOC U. So that's relevant to our listeners. But otherwise, Nicholas Wyman, CEO of the Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation, IWSI, author of Job U, How to Find Wealth and Success by Developing the Skills Companies Actually Need. The book is available on Amazon. The websites are IWSIamerica.org, that's IWSIamerica.org, and skillsresearch.com, skillsresearch.com. Nicholas, thanks so much for coming on the Work From Home Show. Do you have any final thoughts or anything else you want to plug for our listeners?
No, I don't think it's a plug. I'd just like to say that I think your advice that people, the first positive step is people need to keep interacting and keep listening. And the fact that people are listening to us now, having these conversations, is really going to be key to the way that they as individuals respond and rebound. So the good news is, if you're listening to this, you've already made the first very important step forward to the rest of a very exciting life and career, and I wish everyone well.
Excellent. Well, Nicholas Wyman, we greatly appreciate you coming on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners, check out our website, workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. Email us if you have any questions or comments. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. workfromhomeshow.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website. Leave us a review on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify. We are anywhere and everywhere. Take a screenshot of that review, send it to us, and we will send you something free. Get on our mailing list at workfromhomeshow.com, and you'll get a free copy of my book, 50 Shades of Marketing. I promise you'll get it. So get on that mailing list, and until next time, keep on working from home. Workfromhomeshow.com, and you'll get a free copy of my book, 50 Shades of Marketing. I promise you'll get it. So get on that mailing list, and until next time, keep on working from home.